What do we know about polygamy in Islam? Islam was the first religion to name every man and woman equal in the sight of God. Everyone was born free. Therefore, forced servitude and bondage was banned in Islamic cultures. However, for centuries, many people had spread false information and propaganda about the Muslim culture and faith, and one of the topics that come up is the institution of marriage. And in particular, the concept of marrying multiple women at a time raised question among both theists and agnostics. What do we know about Islam? Islam is a monotheistic religion that calls on believers to worship the Lord of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Muslims believe that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the national God of the Israelites who delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, is also the God of Muhammad. While Judaism often refers to this one God as Eloah, Muslims have over 99 names for God, including Ilah and Allah. Unfortunately, since many of the followers of Islam also believe in the false propaganda, I made this video after considerable discussions with archaeologists and historians, as well as Muslim scholars who had pointed out to me the numerous inconsistencies in many theological books. People I came across had questions. They wanted to know about the religious teachings of Islam, in particular about the concept of polygamy. I aim to discuss an aspect of Islam that has been grossly misunderstood, and that is polygamy in the institution of marriage. Is polygamy legal in Islam? What did the Muslim prophet Muhammad have to say on the topic of polygamy? Did he have more than one wife at a time, as many critics of Islam claim? Few people concern themselves with approaching the religious texts with an open mind or studying the holy books objectively, but content themselves with their own, often biased interpretation of the faith. In this brief video, we will attempt to go over a few of the most controversial and least understood topics in Islam, and that is whether polygamy is an Islamic practice or even permitted in this monotheistic religion. Some critics claim Muhammad married multiple women, and they cite evidence from unsubstantiated sources. However, Islamic history wasn't written by the Prophet's companions or Muslim scholars. A huge part was dictated by the pagans of Mecca, who did not spare any effort to vilify the Islamic faith. It is from those unreliable sources that we hear about Muhammad marrying a young girl of 9, named Aisha, when in essence Aisha was 19 at the time of betrothal. Muhammad had no reported scandals in his youth, and at the age of 25 he married an elderly widow named Khadija. It is obvious that he did not marry her for sexual gratification, but for love and mutual respect. One question that is often put forth is why Muhammad had 11 wives, while Islam allows up to 4 wives. The errors in the above question are twofold. One, Islam never allowed men to marry 4 wives, and this claim stems from erroneous interpretation of the Quran. The Islamic holy book stipulates that only 1 wife is to be retained at a time. The second part of the question asks why Muhammad had numerous wives. Muhammad married only 1 woman in his youth, and when his elderly wife passed away, he reluctantly entered into a second marriage, and that too with an elderly widow. Nowhere in the Quran or prophetic traditions or hadith does it mention that Muhammad had 9 or 11 wives. These alleged hadiths that claim Muhammad practiced polygamy have been sourced from fabricated narrations. It is astounding how only Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is accused of polygamy, when it was the other prophets such as Abraham, David, Solomon, and Jacob who were all in polygamous marriages. According to the Old and New Testament, their wives and concubines came in great numbers. Polygamy was not at all uncommon in biblical times, and according to the biblical accounts, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. King David is reported to have 6 to 10 wives. Although God provided rights and protections for concubines in the law of Moses, there was no limit on the number of women a man could marry. Islam changed this. When the Quran insisted that man should only keep one wife, and in his lifetime, Muhammad also acted on this monogamous principle. Islam did not invent polygamy, but regulated it in favor of women before banning it completely. Muhammad was not allowed to be more polygamous than his followers, and consequently retained only one wife. Even when polygamy was initially severely restricted, but permitted only if a wife stipulated it in the marriage contract that she desires her husband to take another wife, Islam made polygamy more humane, instituting equal rights for all wives. However, Muslim women and wives have always been given the right to put condition against it in their marriage contract. The Quran advocated for men to marry only one, and the general rule in Islam is monogamy, not polygamy. The Quran verse that is often cited as evidence for polygamy is in chapter An-Nisa. Marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one. Polygamy in Islam is not recommended. It was only permitted under certain guidelines. Permission to practice polygamy is not associated with mere satisfaction of passion. It is, rather, associated with compassion toward widows and orphans. Before the Quran was revealed, there was no upper limit for polygamy, and many Arab and non-Arab men had more than 4 wives. Before banning it completely, Islam put an upper limit on 4 wives, permitting a man to marry more than once, only on the condition that he deal justly with all of them. Yet the same verse points out, you are never able to be fair and just as between women, hence effectively negating the idea of polygamy. The double negation proves that the Islamic God used logical reasonings to ban the practice of polygamy once and for all. As we can see, polygamy has been negated in the verses of the Quran. It is a decree by the Muslim God who commanded men and women to practice monogamy at all times. The same God who granted Jews the law of Moses at biblical Mount Sinai and revealed Torah to Prophet Moses and the New Testament to Prophet Jesus is the one God who revealed the final testament, or the Quran, to Muhammad, who Muslims consider to be last of all the prophets. So, who was Muhammad? The Islamic religion was founded by a man named Muhammad, who was a shepherd in his youth. Muhammad is arguably one of the most controversial icons of the modern world, not least because there has been little historical research done on his persona. Since he was a young man, Muhammad was known as the most truthful person in Mecca. From before his prophethood, he believed in the God of Abraham and shunned idol worship. He never spoke a lie, even as a joke. Muhammad lived by a unique set of morals, and in his entire life, he did not kill one human being, even in war when he was attacked and tortured fiercely. So, what was Arabia like before Muhammad taught the pagan desert inhabitants to worship the God of Abraham and give up idolatry? Arabia was less than civilized when Muhammad was a young man. Rampant murderers, tribal feuds, illicit relationships, indiscriminate slavery, and mass plundering was the norm. Even prior to becoming a prophet, Muhammad abhorred such practices and encouraged others to be charitable. Following the advent of his prophethood, Muhammad gave women equal rights in a time when women were nothing but the property of men. Muhammad taught people the covenants of Islam, which gave women the right to buy and sell without hindrance, own businesses, and express her views politically. These were all basic rights which the American and European women were not granted until relatively recently. Muhammad also encouraged women to study and learn Islamic and scientific knowledge, breaking a ban which several religions had stipulated, that forbid women from acquiring any religious knowledge or touch religious texts. It also abolished the practice of marrying a woman without her consent. Thus, many historians suggest that by bringing forth Islam, the Prophet Muhammad was women's first liberator in 6th century Arabia. While many people around the world are misinformed about Muhammad's lifestyle and characteristics, others have given him the due credit for the many changes he brought about. After his prophethood, Muhammad was granted the Quran, a scripture which had never been changed in the last 1400 years. Muslims believe the Quran is undoubtedly from a supreme and spiritual being because the scientific facts that are stated in the Quran are in no way possible for man to have known 14 centuries ago. The Book of Islam, regardless of what subject it refers to, has often been proven as God's word, as each new piece of historical, scientific, or archaeological information comes to light. Facts about scientific subjects and the news delivered to us about the past and future, facts that no human being could have known at the time of the Quran's revelation, are announced in its verses. It is impossible for this information to have been known with the level of knowledge and technology available in 7th century Arabia. In addition to mentioning the atomic number, every single element, the genetic code of many living organisms, the theory of entropy, and a steadily expanding universe, and how each individual's fingertips are absolutely unique, when we have only discovered this fact recently, using modern technology and modern scientific equipment. The Quran includes unique details about black holes, pulsars, the Rosetta Nebula, subatomic particles, quantum physics, fossilization and iron content, the layers of Earth, the weight of clouds, the relativity of time, the force of gravity, the orbital movements, the sun's trajectory, the programming in genes, the sun's hydrogen and helium content, or many other facts scientists of our day are only just beginning to discover. In chapter 4 of the Quran, God informs people, if it, the Quran, had been from other than Allah, they would have found many inconsistencies in it. Quran, verse 82 of chapter 4. This verse was meant to highlight that Muhammad, who was an ordinary human, couldn't have known those scientific facts back then, which only modern science is being able to prove now. Muhammad loved animals and was especially fond of both cats and dogs. He entreated the Bedouin Arabs to treat their camels gently. Dogs were also considered to be valued creations of God and held a very high position in the Quran, as is mentioned in chapter Kahf. Muhammad opposed animal cruelty and severely reprimanded cattle owners who mistreated their herds. He never ordered to kill a single dog or cat in his entire lifetime. Despite his idealized vision for peace and stability, the pagan Arabs of Mecca were outraged by his demands. Muhammad was tortured mercilessly by pagans when he began to preach the teachings of Islam, but he never retaliated and was eventually forced to flee to nearby city of Medina. When Prophet Muhammad took over Mecca a decade later, he never took revenge against any one of his former oppressors. Muhammad continued preaching Islam to those vanquished Meccans and offered them utmost mercy and freedom, which included granting liberty, especially to women and slaves, who were oppressed mercilessly by the pagan Romans and the French. Women in those societies neither had the right to inherit nor had the right to marry on her own, or buy or sell or own any property at the pre-Islamic period. Muhammad therefore announced that women and men had equal position in the eyes of God, and he gave them the right to inherit, buy, sell, and marry on their own. Attempts to introduce greater sexual equality to religion did not produce great results in the past, partially because some men hijacked the faith and dragged it back to the old patriarchy. This happened in both Christianity and Islam, latter-day reassertions of axial age monotheism. The Prophet Muhammad, for example, was anxious to emancipate women, and they were among his first converts. In 7th century Arabia, the Quran taught people that men and women had exactly the same responsibilities and duties, and gave women rights of inheritance and divorce that we would not enjoy in the West until the 19th century. Muhammad's inherent desire to instill civil behaviour into his countrymen drove him to the streets. For days he would traverse the desert hills and entreat his fellow Arabs to enjoin kindness and equality. He urged them to free their slaves and deal mercifully with women and children. Muhammad encouraged the wealthy Arab merchants to give charity to the poor and orphans. But the pagan Arabs were infuriated by his claims that women and men should enjoy equal rights. This caused them to torture and persecute him endlessly. One of his staunch persecutors was his own uncle and his cousin. For 3 years, his fellow Meccans and other dominant tribes levied a ban on trade with Muhammad's family and followers and subjected them to near-famine conditions. In this sanction, Muhammad's wife and uncle both died, but Muhammad survived the ordeal. The pagan leaders of Mecca then attempted to assassinate Muhammad, but he fled Mecca at nightfall and escaped to the city of Medina. Why were the people who call themselves Arab today torturing and killing Muhammad and his family 14 centuries ago? It was because he enjoined others to do acts of charity and free their slaves and to respect the womenfolk. His crime was he wanted to give women more rights than men. He banned murder and called for an end to tribal feuds in which wealthy families got away by killing poor or less distinguished people. They resented the fact that he abolished slavery and stipulated that prisoners of war could be taken in the aftermath of a combat, but must be freed upon the payment of ransom. He would remain in near-starvation rations to ensure the prisoners of war were fed adequately. The endless persecution became unbearable for Muhammad and his followers, and only after a Christian king in Africa offered him and the Muslims shelter in his country did the believers get some respite for a few days. Why did I make this video? I was approached by hundreds of people who had questions about various aspects of Islam and its founder Muhammad. While this faith had its share of controversies in the recent years, it is still demonized by many and understood by even fewer. So, after receiving a lot of requests on social media from people who wanted to know the truth about Islamic teachings, I decided to conduct independent research and gathered information from renowned scholars to find out the actual events in the light of modern and ancient history. As much as many of us want to avoid religious topics and theological discussions, as it understandably pushes some out of their comfort zones, misunderstanding others' faith and religion often causes bitter dissent and even violent brawls to outright war. It is no secret that the Crusades was a dark stain on the Christian history of Europe, and many people were quick to blame Christianity for inciting violence, as in this century the same is often said about Islam. Men and women with shallow knowledge of religious scriptures and laws often rush to draw conclusions after reading unverified texts and passages taken out of context. For instance, churchgoers sometimes hear biblical verses that advise fornicators to be put to death. The passages in the Bible which appear to glorify killing and quote Jesus to be promoting slavery, or the Old Testament verse that commands people to stone women who commit fornication, are often taken out of context in order to depict Judaism and Christianity in a negative way. The same is also done with Islam, and as such, some distorted images are publicized in the media under the guise of objective reporting. It is possible that mention of slavery in the Bible is not meant in a literal form, or perhaps stoning women from adultery was merely suggested in the laws of Moses and may not have been strictly commanded. What purpose does religion serve? All men and women are creation of one God, and regardless of religion, race or culture, religion serves to increase affection, love and kindness among us. Religions offer a way to expand on the idea of brotherhood and friendship, and Islam, like the other monotheistic religions like Judaism and Christianity, call upon people to worship the God of Abraham and live peacefully with one another. However, this message of love and peace is often distorted by some who run misinformation campaigns and propaganda online that can confuse the honest seeker of knowledge and facts. It is necessary sometimes to address the facts that people of various backgrounds can judge for themselves what the truth is, rather than being misled into believing in some false propaganda and be coaxed to hate certain religion, sect or race. Despising others blindly can serve no purpose except augment one's own unhappiness. It is up to us to use religion as a mean to expand the unification of humankind and spread kindness and love to every man, woman, and children. All of us are in the eyes of one God, who does not discriminate between religion, race, or gender. I elected to make this video mostly to post historical facts accurately and to put an end to the misinformation that plagues the media. This persistent misinformation is dangerous because it turns one man against another, makes one race hate another, brews anger, and eventually leads nations across the world into harsh warfare. Islam is the most misinterpreted religion in the world, particularly because of historical inaccuracies that have been spreading for a long time. Arabs in pre-Islamic Arabia would often spread false information about Muhammad and his followers, and some of those stories inadvertently ended up becoming parts of religious booklets, and those false accounts were even adopted by some Muslim scholars who taught those to be authentic prophetic narrations. Hence, in order to understand the Islamic religion, it is necessary to study only the Quran, as this has never been altered in any way. How are women treated in Islam? Women are highly respected in Islam, and treating them with respect has been made incumbent on all men. 1,450 years ago, when Islam came on the scene, it nullified and negated the concept of polygamy. Before Islam, women were considered shameful, female children were buried alive, prostitution was rampant, divorce was only in the hands of the husband, inheritance was only for the strong, and oppression was widespread. Islam came and abolished these practices. Even now, in developed countries, women are not always granted due respect, dignity and honour, let alone equal pay for equal work. Islam, however, regards women as precious and valuable, not to be disrespected or disgraced. The mistreatment of women in some Middle Eastern countries or Muslim families is due to cultural factors that some Muslims wrongly follow, not because of Islam. Why would many women around the world willingly enter Islam if it is an oppressive religion? In this religion, women are often granted more privilege than men. The weaker someone is physically, the more rights Islam gives them. The concept that Islam gives women any less rights than men are completely wrong and inaccurate, unfounded, unjust, and grossly ill-informed. Not all cultures and societies have been fair to women. Some fascist institutions believe that men are superior to women. Female students in those places were required to pay double the fees in schools and universities. Until today, women in our Western societies do not receive equal salary as men. In Vermont, women must obtain written permission from their husbands to wear false teeth. In Montana, it is a felony for a wife to open her husband's mail. In Michigan, a woman may not cut her own hair without her husband's permission. In Islam, no prejudicial distinction is made between the individuals of a society, whether women, men, wealthy, poor, young or old. Social standing, profession, wealth or gender do not make people enjoy particular privileges. The life of women in the pre-Islamic period, when female infanticide was the norm, and when women had no rights at all, were no better treated than livestock. Like slaves, women were treated as an inferior species who had no legal existence. In such a primitive world, what Prophet Muhammad achieved for women was extraordinary. The very idea that a woman could be a witness or could inherit anything at all in her own right was astonishing. In fact, during the many centuries that followed Prophet Muhammad, women of the Islamic society had much higher social position than the non-Muslim women of that time. During the Middle Ages, the Muslims were horrified to see the way Westerners treated their women in Europe and the Crusader states, and the European government and Christian scholars denounced Islam for giving too much powers to menials like women and slaves. Islam first gave women their rights in a time when women were nothing but the property of men. Islam gave women the right to buy and sell on their own, control business and express views politically. These were all the basic rights which the American woman was not granted until recently. Islam encouraged women to study and learn Islamic knowledge and science and law, breaking a ban which several religions have stipulated, which forbid women to acquire any religious knowledge or even touch religious texts. It also abolished the practice of marrying women without her consent. Islam also made marriage settlement or dowry compulsory for men to give women at the time of marriage. It allowed a woman to require any amount of money and from her would-be husband in order for the marriage to be legalized. In Islam, women had the right to earn, spend, or keep her money before and after marriage. Islam gave women innumerable rights in regards to every law, thus one would have to be very ignorant indeed to refuse that Islam was the first liberator of womankind. In Britain and most of Europe, women had little or no rights or active role to play in daily affairs. As the dawn of Islam was starting to illuminate the long shadow of oppression on women and slaves, the French civilization in the same period, 586 CE, only after Muhammad, peace be upon him, migrated to Medina and Islam became prevalent, the French were claiming compassion and civility by passing a law and resolution, after great deliberation and controversy, that women can be classified as a human being and not an animal. However, she is created for the sole purpose of serving man. How did women fare in the Greek and Roman civilizations? In the days of ignorance, prior to the advent of Islam, women in many cultures throughout the world were considered little more than commodities, objects of desire to be bought and sold like livestock. According to Prophet Will Durant, in Rome, the man alone had any rights before the law in the early republic. He alone could buy, hold or sell property, or make contracts. Even his wife's dowry in this period belonged to him. If his wife was accused of a crime, she was committed to him for judgment, and he could punish her by condemning her to death for infidelity or for stealing the keys to his wine cellar. Over his children he had the power of life, death, and sale into slavery. If the child was deformed or female, the father was committed by custom to expose it to death. The Greeks considered women to belong to the third or lowest rank of society. If a woman gave birth to a deformed child, it was common practice to kill her. In Sparta, which was acknowledged as an elite society, a woman who could no longer bear children was put to death. What about women's rights in Judaism? Orthodox Jews' parents, on the birth of a male child, invite guests to a kiddush, a celebratory meal after Sabbath, where there is no such custom after the birth of a female child. There are no parallel celebration for women in Jewish custom. The inequality and injunction towards female oppression is further to be found in the law relating to divorce. A woman has no right of divorce. Even if her husband disappears without trace, without the evidence of his death, she cannot remarry. A man has the only right of divorce, and many men have abused this right by abandoning women but not divorcing them, thereby restricting them to remarry. According to Lebon, the male Orthodox Jew solemnly recites, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, that I was not born a female." Hinduism's treatment of women. Women fared little better in other belief systems. In Hinduism, the perfect woman is the Pativrata, the devoted wife whose entire existence is dedicated to her husband. The very word Pativrata says it all. She whose vow, Vista, is to her husband, Pati. During her lifetime, the good Hindu wife is expected to regard her husband as her only personal god, and after a blameless life, she must take her own life on her husband's funeral pyre. This horrific rite, known as sati, was until very recently still being practiced in India, and the government has had to intervene to abolish it. Nevertheless, for devout Hindus, a woman who is sati is worshipped as a goddess, the perfect example of the self-sacrificing wife. The Darwinist roots of the hostility to women. Fascists did not merely appropriate the idea of the inequality between the races from Darwinism, they also adopted the idea that men were superior to women. In The Descent of Man, Darwin wrote that women have characteristic of the lower races, and therefore of a past and lower state of civilization. Another follower of Darwin, the evolutionist social psychologist Gustave Le Bon, wrote that in the most intelligent races are a number of women whose brains are closer in size to those of gorillas than to the most developed male brains. This inferiority is so obvious that no one can contest it for a moment, only its degree is worth discussion. Other irregular Darwinists stated that women represent the most inferior forms of human evolution and are closer to children and savages than to an adult civilized man. Mussolini's taking away of women's social rights and Hitler's building of breeding farms to reproduce the superior race and obliging young girls to sleep with SS officers are all reflections of fascists' attitudes to women. Both Darwinists and fascists see women as an inferior and backward species, and both despise them, as well as employing discriminatory and oppressive methods against them. This fascist perspective is completely at odds with the ethics of the Quran. Allah has commanded in the Quran that women should be cherished, respected, and protected. In addition, he has shown examples of women with superior morals, such as Mary and the wife of Pharaoh. In the eyes of God, superiority does not lie in race, sex, or rank, but in closeness to him and strength of belief. In a number of verses of the Quran, God has revealed that all believers will receive their reward without discrimination between men and women. The Lord speaks in Surah Al-Imran of the Quran, "I will not let the deeds of any doer among you go to waste, male or female. You are both the same in that respect." Verse 195. In verse 124 of Surah An-Nisa 124, Allah announces, anyone, male or female, who does right actions and is a believer will enter the garden. They will not be wronged by so much as the tiniest speck. The One Lord speaks in Surah An-Nahl of the Quran, anyone who acts rightly, male or female, being a believer, we will give them a good life, and we will recompense them according to the best of what they did. Verse 97. Why are there rumours about Islam that is a proponent of polygamy? In pre-Islamic Arabia, the pagans of Mecca were infuriated with Muhammad when he called upon them to shun slavery, adultery, polygamy, and larceny. They decided to taint his reputation by spreading false rumours about his conjugal life and marriage. Who did Muhammad marry? At the age of 25, Muhammad married an entrepreneur named Khadija, a woman who was 15 years his senior. He lived happily with her as long as her entire lifetime. After the death of his first wife, Muhammad was grieving bitterly, but he reluctantly entered into an official marriage with an elderly widow by the name Sauda. There have been no prophetic narrations or Quran verse that confirms Muhammad took any other woman as his wedded wife. In the final years of his life, there has been 2 or 3 incidents of contractual marriage in which severely ill or elderly women and widows who had no means of livelihood and begged the Prophet to marry them so that they would have a noble pension in society were granted their wishes. However, it should be noted that Muhammad never engaged in sexual relations with any woman except his first wife, Khadija. He never consummated his marriage with other women because he was a man of God devoted to worship. Some men have oppressed women from time immemorial, and they continue to find excuses to mistreat their wives. It is possible that those people came up with the absurd idea that Islam permits or orders men to take multiple sexual partners via marriage. Where they found religion, they used it to suppress women, much like the way law was used to repress women until very recently. Only a century ago was the United States generous enough to let women vote. Prior to that, English common law deprived women of money, status, and even her own identity. In ancient Greece, Athenian women remained the property of their fathers, who could have them marry anyone against her wishes. Under Roman law, the husband had absolute power over his wife and could justifiably kill her. Not to mention traditional Hindu cultures which required a widow to immolate herself after her husband's death. In the absence of any kind of religion, the world had proven itself to be treacherous. Understandably, the laws crafted, edited, and validated chiefly by men would be unable to sufficiently address women's rights. While there are certain laws in place guaranteeing equality of men, women and non-binary people, but who could guarantee that situation for women will not regress in the near or far future? Islam, as a final revealed religion of one God, offered human beings unalterable laws that guaranteed equality and justice for all. But while man-made laws have attempted to borrow from the Islamic principles, there are consequences of law written by men. In the name of freedom, of course, women in certain places are being banned from concealing their hair. They do not yet have the right to equal pay. It is grievous to imagine what miseries the future stores for women. The prospects may well be dark. Women today are being vilified by leaders, objectified by the media, and dismissed by the law. The assumption that religion or Islam suppresses women's rights is unfounded. Before the Renaissance, pre-civilized Europe treated women poorly, and have been the case in recent times. There was an uproar in the media over a controversial clothing ban on women. Women were required by law to keep their head uncovered in certain parts of Europe. The law forbade women from wearing scarves, but no such rule applied to men. Men in France were at liberty to don hats or helmets. These men banned scarves or hijabs for women by using fellow women to preach oppression in the name of freedom. However, the situation swiftly became tragic when armed police forced a woman on a beach at gunpoint to remove her swimsuit, because she had worn a head covering. The woman in question was a mother and a French citizen for generations. The secular man-made law forced a mother to undress in public while her children were crying next to her, and other people on the beach were jeering. It was merely an example of men using the law to demean women. Pagan Europe, as well as pre-Islamic Arabia, deprived women from basic civil rights, such as the right to cover one's body. Aside from general oppressions, female infanticide was common in pagan Arabia, as well as in ancient Rome. In the early 7th century, a man named Muhammad rose to prominence in Arabia for preaching theism, calling for equal treatment for women and men and slaves in law and religion. Naturally, Europe along with the rest of the world was shocked. They denounced Muhammad for granting women civil rights, such as inheritance, earnings, political power, and religious authority. Female scholars reigned supreme in nearly all aspects of Islamic literature and jurisprudence, at a period where to associate literacy with women was unthinkable in Europe. Some nations began to amend their own laws to make it more woman-friendly, while pagan Arabs cursed and belittled Muhammad for granting women and slaves so much freedom for the first time. It was the first religious or political dogma that gave men, women, and slaves same position in the eyes of God, same sin, same punishment, and same reward, and same duties. In 586 AD, only after Muhammad had migrated to Medina and Islam became prevalent, the French Parliament claimed compassion and civility by passing a revolution, after great deliberation and controversy, that women could be classified as humans, but were created for the sole purpose to serve man. Before this, women were officially termed as animals and, in certain parts of Paris, did not have the privilege to wear clothes. The laws of 7th century French Parliament was patriarchal, but what is horrifying is that in today's civilized world, women are being steadily reduced to the degraded status they had occupied centuries earlier. A decade later, a politician could decide that women must not vote or hold public office. I would have imagined such a possibility is unlikely had I not witnessed firsthand how even a basic civil right, such as wearing clothes, had already been seized from women, and that too by a country that claims to be a beacon of liberty and champion modernity. In today's world, we see there is a ban on wearing veils by women taking effect in many major cities, like Paris, Nice, and Belgium. Wearing head or face coverings for women resulted in punitive measures. Women who venture out with veils or facial covering could end with hefty fines or occasional jail time, but some young women are continually defying such unfair laws and persist in exercising their civil rights. Few intergovernmental bodies confronted on whether the scarf ban is legal, although human rights groups such as Amnesty International claimed the ban on women's clothing appeared to infringe civil liberties. Other cities in Europe also banned full-body swimsuit in beaches. However, as an expression of male defiance, some brave women who have the courage to stand up to those misogynistic men are defying imprisonments and fines in order to stand up for the right to wear a veil and a full-sleeved swimsuit. Those women felt it was subterranean patriarchy for men to dictate which part of a woman's body they wished to see. Islam is an unchangeable religion that was, is, and will always be the first religion to declare every human being that was born to be equal in the eyes of one God.